Donald Trump's budget mega bill was passed by the Senate yesterday. The fact that this is not a normal bill is reflected in how that went down. Chuck Schumer commented that he had been struck by the fact that, quote, on the Republican side, when the bill passed, there was a bit of somberness that I don't think was expected. And that was because they knew deep in their hearts how bad this bill is for them, their states, and the Republican Party. That certainly reflects the view of the Democrats anyway. It says a lot that they are jumping on the fact that the bill was only passed with the casting vote of Vice President JD Vance. Vance, seen, of course, as the current MAGA heir apparent. They are rushing to associate him with the bill with a view that as the consequences play out, it will damage him in any attempt to run for the presidency in 2028. So, for example, California Governor Gavin Newsom told Americans to bookmark the moment that Vance became the ultimate reason why 17 million Americans will lose their health care. Pete Buttigieg posted, VP Vance has cast the deciding vote in the Senate to cut Medicaid, take away food assistance, blow up the deficit, and add tax breaks for the wealthiest. For his part, JD Vance sought to bat away any focus on the medical changes or any other aspects of the bill held to be damaging, to focus in on the bit that he could benefit from. The thing that will bankrupt this country more than any other policy, he said, is flooding the country with illegal immigration and then giving those migrants generous benefits. The bill fixes this problem, and therefore it must pass. Everything else, the CBO score, the proper baseline, the minutiae of the Medicaid policy, is immaterial compared to the ICE money and immigration enforcement provisions. Very convenient that such things can be so lightly brushed away, you might think. The CBO score that he refers to is the Congressional Budget Office estimation that the bill would increase America's debt by nearly $3.3 trillion over the next decade. Now, that was nearly $1 trillion more than the version of the bill that originally passed the House and arrived at the Senate. Senator Rand Paul, one of the 3 Republicans to vote against, said that his colleagues who like to consider themselves as deficit hawks had nowhere else to point fingers at when the debt projections were realized. He said this, Republicans now own the debt and Republicans now own the spending. There is no more blaming, oh, it's Biden's fault. The deficit is fully, completely owned by Republicans. So the deficit figures are taken very seriously by some, even if not by JD Vance. The minutiae of the Medicaid policy that Vance referred to, that would be the minor detail that around 11.8 million Americans would become uninsured by 2034. A trifle for JD, but a nightmare for those people, presumably. But then 1.4 million of those kicked off Medicaid would be illegal immigrants, according to Senator Eric Schmidt, who was retweeted approvingly by Vance. So that became the point of focus, as Vance said in response to someone else complaining about the removal of insurance for millions of people. This guy wants to bankrupt Medicaid by importing millions of illegal immigrants and giving them health care that ought by right to go to his fellow citizens. Now he pretends to care about them. The dishonesty is off the charts. If that was all that was involved, you would be puzzled to find that some Republicans have been seriously unhappy with the bill because of it. So Tom Tillis, for instance, who announced that he was standing down as Senator for North Carolina at the end of his term, in large part over the Medicaid cuts, which he said would wreak havoc in his state. In a speech during the debate, Tillis reminded his colleagues of the election promise that no deserving Medicaid recipient would lose coverage. Senator Josh Hawley voted for the bill, but then said he was so opposed to the Medicaid provisions within it, he would spend the next 2 years trying to get them overturned. And this is very much why many Republicans are distinctly uneasy about the implications of the bill, while believing that because of the MAGA vindictiveness towards people who vote the wrong way, they're still better off sticking with the crowd and hoping that the fallout doesn't stick to them. But it's hard to see this playing out well with many of the people who believed that Trump was on their side. So, for example, the electrical workers, the building trades, the iron workers, all those manly jobs that Trump has been saying he wants to bring back to the United States. Well, they have been blasting this bill as a historic job killer because of the way it turns aggressively on the previous support for renewables manufacturing. And a lot of tech executives as well have been sounding the alarm about the fact that, in spite of all of Trump's rhetoric about there being an energy crisis, slamming the brakes on wind and solar right now is giving up the easiest and cheapest way to increase generating capacity, something that's very much needed for all that artificial intelligence hardware. And that's even before you factor in the reality that such technology is the technology of the future. So Trump is basically ceding industries like battery storage and electric vehicles to China, otherwise known as America's closest rival. So yes, Republicans are fearful that this bill that they pass because it's still Trump's party and he gets fixated on stuff that doesn't necessarily make sense, that this bill will lose them support. And Democrats are convinced that will indeed be the case, hence why they want to nail the MAGA faces of the future to it fair and square. Interestingly, Trump has even been distancing himself from the bill, saying at one point that he hopes it didn't have too many cuts in it. For all cost-cutting Republicans, of which I am one, remember you still have to get re-elected. Don't go too crazy. We will make it all up times 10 with growth more than ever before. Now, at the time of shooting this video, the bill is back with the House. Some House Republicans are not wholly impressed at the changes that have happened since they last saw this bill. Deficit even higher, Medicaid cuts even more biting. Trump had demanded that the bill should be on his desk to sign by July the 4th. But as many have noted, that is an entirely arbitrary, unnecessary deadline designed to encourage people to push things forward without the degree of scrutiny that the masses of detail and all the different proposals really should be subjected to. But in some ways, the deadline isn't really the issue. Because sure, yes, there are large numbers of policy proposals in the bill with implications that are not getting time and debate that they should be getting. And no doubt some of those will emerge from obscurity into full daylight to bite in the future. But the central problem with the bill is the one that is staring everyone in the face and which everyone is already talking about. For all that Republicans try to engage in some novel accounting tricks to redefine the added deficit to the opposite, nobody really believes that this will do anything other than explode an already too large debt pile. The United States has debt currently equivalent to a full year's GDP. The bill would push that way further. It is a bill whose insanity is completely in line with the insanity of slapping tariffs on the world based on fringe theories about the downside of having a trade deficit. And it is completely in line with the insanity of suggesting you might use military force to take over Greenland. In other words, it is a bill that would only ever be contemplated to be passed in this form because Donald Trump is the president and so bonkers stuff is the new normal. In the massive rush caused by a fake deadline, Congress is about to inflict probably long-lasting damage on the finances and the global standing of the United States. It's going to impose substantial harms on tens of millions of the citizens of the United States, and while Republicans argue defensively that the tax cuts involved will generate growth, that will offset some of that extra spending with additional tax revenue, they clearly themselves don't believe that such an effect is going to be enough to offset the obvious harms. Indeed, the Budget Lab at Yale projected that the original House bill would lead to a short-lived boost to growth, yes, thanks to the tax cuts, but that would quickly be eroded away for future years as the amount and the cost of debt created a drag on the economy. So you have to ask the question, if Republicans themselves basically know that this is self-harm for the country and for their party, why are most of them voting for it regardless? It is surely the same reason why most of them lined up alongside the tariffs. Few of them supported the idea of tariffs being used in the way that Trump has been using them, but they went along with it anyway, because this has become a movement with little tolerance for free thinking and disobedience. They all suspect that will change after the midterms, if Trump gets a pushback. And in any case, from that time onwards, the focus will shift towards the contest to find the person who carries the standard into the next election. But it hasn't changed yet. They are likely calculating that even those who stand against the base and get proven right by events won't matter. They won't be recognised for having been right, nor will they be forgiven. So it's safest to be no more right or wrong than the herd. And the herd is basically doing what Trump wants it to. And thanks to that, you could dismiss it as spinelessness. The US is taking on a bewildering cascade of measures, the consequences of which will be unravelling before our eyes for the next few years. The short-term stuff will matter, because if it makes enough of an impression on the electorate, it could mean the US system ejects the MAGA project from power before it has time to fully consolidate itself. But the long-term impact will be the most important, since it is that will accelerate America's decline as a world power, the cascade of consequences having become irreversible, with burgeoning debt becoming more and more expensive to service, and everything that comes with it. By then, it may well be that people will look back to this moment as perhaps the very last time when the drift could have been corrected, but nobody stood up.